And now, to begin our event, we have DeLanna Studi, who will be reading an excerpt from The Removed. Following, Brandon and Rebecca will join us for a conversation. DeLanna, take it away.
Osio, the Dawodo DeLanna di Ann Carol Chun Studi Kaywood, Chi Chalagi, Aya, Oklahoma. Hi, I'm DeLanna Studi, and I am a proud citizen of the Cherokee Nation, and I'm speaking to you tonight from Cherokee Nation, formerly known as Eastern Oklahoma. And tonight, I have the luxury of reading The Removed, a novel by Brandon Hobson. Prologue. Ray Ichoda, September 5th, Qua, Oklahoma. The day before he died, in the remote town of Qua, Oklahoma, Ray Ichoda rode his motorcycle down the empty stretch of highway, blowing past rain puddles and trees, a strong wind pressing against his body. He was 15 years old. Workers along the side of the road wore orange vests and white hard hats. They didn't pay any attention to him as he flew past them, hunched forward, working the throttle. He rode for the pureness of the thrill and for the isolation of riding alone in an area where few police officers ever patrolled. Clouds hung low and pale before him as he rode home past fields and old buildings, heading east into the hills, landscape and sky blending into the horizon. That night, he did impersonations at home to entertain his parents. While Ernest and Maria watched their police drama on TV, Ray staggered into the living room wearing dark sunglasses and waving a cane around, pretending he was blind. He stood in front of them, blocking their view of the TV, and spoke in his best French accent. You care to help an old blind man, monsieur? I am in need of assistance. Funny, Maria said. Isn't he funny, Ernest? I'm trying to watch my show, Ernest said. But monsieur, Ray said. Ernest leaned forward and watched Ray as he removed his sunglasses and went through his usual impersonations. Pee Wee Herman, Marlon Brando's Vito Corleone, even Ernest's friend Otto, who told old Cherokee stories drunk. Listen, Chooch, Ray said in Otto's low, drunken voice. He pretended to smoke an imaginary cigarette. You know the story of Sala, who was killed for refusing to leave the land? Let's go get another whiskey. Not bad, Ernest said. We'll probably see him tomorrow at the Cherokee National Holiday. The following day, September 6th, marked the anniversary of the 1839 signing of the Constitution of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. Ernest spoke with the unfamiliar excitement in his voice about the date's importance. This is a very important day for all of us, since it marks the trail, so we should honor it. September 6th usually fell close to Labor Day weekend and brought people from all over the country to Oklahoma. The Ichodas planned to spend the entire weekend watching stickball games, attending powwows, pageants, and art shows. Outside, a storm was heading west instead of east. A soft rain pattered against the window, the beginning of a thunderstorm. The night was cool and dry. The house smelled of fried catfish from dinner, which they had eaten on TV trays there in the living room. Did you finish your homework? Marie asked Ray. The paper is done, A+ with a smiley face. I bid you all good night. Ave atque vale. What? It's Latin for hail and farewell. Ave atque vale. Sure, Marie said. Now go play with your little brother. Edgar, the youngest sibling, was sitting on a blanket playing quietly with Legos in the corner of the room, as he often did. Ray limped over to him, dragging his leg like a wounded soldier, and collapsed. He began helping Edgar stack Legos together. When Ray was younger, he had fallen out of the tree in their backyard, breaking his leg in 3 places. He spent a few days in the hospital, where he told the nurse he had learned to levitate like the false prophet Simon Magus. I flew up in the air 40, 50 feet and then fell, he said. That explains the broken leg. The nurse looked at Ernest and Maria, confused. My son has an active imagination, Ernest kept saying, which was true. Ray always carried with him a notebook in which he scribbled song lyrics and sketched strange creatures, beasts with fire shooting from their eyes and tongues hanging from their mouths, chubby old men with pig snouts instead of noses, Anactina and Taunua, the mythic hawks who carried away babies. Ernest and Maria encouraged his artistry, his drawings and impersonations, and also loved how he enjoyed searching outside near the lake for animal bones, bird bones, and feathers to make necklaces. How he wore certain shirts he said were for healing. How he was fascinated by the sky and would go lie down and watch the stars at night. How he mowed lawns and cleaned roof gutters for 2 summers until he earned enough money to buy his own 250cc Nighthawk, the motorcycle he would ride to the mall in Tulsa on September 6th, the day he was shot by a police officer. Sonia, who was 16 and the eldest sibling, was eccentric in her own way, too, retreating to our room every day after school and staying there all night, rarely coming out. Sensitive to the strange intimacy of family conversations, she preferred solitude. On this night, she was in her bedroom writing long letters to boys at school and listening to Joy Division. She would later wonder why she hadn't been in the living room spending time with Ray. If only I'd been a better sister, she often thought. The night of September 5th, his last night alive, Ray lay next to his younger brother Edgar on the floor with the Legos. "We should build a castle," he said. "It could be beautiful, brother." "I'm building a monster," Edgar told him excitedly. He held up his Lego creature and roared. "Little brother," Ray said, "there are enough monsters in this world." Wado, thank you. Now let's turn to tonight's conversation with our guest of honor, Brandon Hobson.
Hey.
Hey. So, I mean, I saw you in the virtual green room, but it's great to see you here.
Yeah.
We were just saying that although we haven't seen each other in nearly a year, you were one of the last people I hung out with on this planet.
Yeah.
About a year, like a little less than a year ago.
San Antonio, yeah.
Yeah, man. But it's great to have you here. Before we start, I know we both want to thank the Strand, Penn, and Scripps for their kind of triumvirate support and planning of this entire event. The ASL interpreters and the theatrical interpreter who are making this a much more exciting evening. So thank you to everyone involved, and thank you to all of you for being here. Brandon and I got snowed on. I'm in Chicago. That makes a lot of sense. He's like, would you say 10 miles from the Mexican border, and he got snowed on. So
yeah. For about 40 miles, but pretty close to, yeah, down here in Las Cruces. So pretty close, but we got snow yesterday. And also Wado, thank you to DeLanna Studi for that beautiful reading. She's a much better reader than I am.
Oh, that was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So I have so many questions for you. You guys, this book is brilliant. This book is so good. I am not getting bribed to say that. I need you to know how good this book is. Talk to me about, okay, so when did it officially come out into the world? What was the actual publication date?
February 2nd was the actual, yeah.
So we are 2 weeks in, is that right?
2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks from ago today.
Yeah. So part of how I want to start here before we actually talk about The Removed, I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about your career in general and then how you got to this book. When I met you, we were both finalists for the National Book Award. We were in New York, and it was like the night before the thing. And I remember being a little blown away by you saying that you felt like you had such imposter syndrome being there. When, you know, I knew that that was a kind of, you know, sure, we all have imposter syndrome, but you don't get to the National Book Awards by accident. But I understand that was a change for you. You had had 2 books previously, is that right? With small independent presses. Suddenly with a 3rd book, you have a major New York publisher, a ton of publicity and acclaim. And now you're heading into this book in a situation where people already know your name from the last one. So first of all, can you talk a little bit about those first 2 books? What changed with the 3rd one? What brought you to the 4th one? And then I'm going to ask you a follow-up too.
Yeah. So thanks. And thanks everybody for being here and listening to me. But those first 2 books have nothing at all to do with Native issues whatsoever, right? They are, the first one was more of a novella, actually. The second one was my PhD creative dissertation, which was a lot more experimental and playful. And then when I wrote Where the Dead Sit Talking, I really wanted to, you know, write something about Native issues and foster care. And we could have a really long conversation about colonization and how I never really felt Native enough to attack, right, and sort of unpack Native issues in my life. And but at some point, you know, I in realizing, you know, that comes out of colonization, right? The thinking and how that really places limits on those of us who identify as Native writers or as Native in general. You know, to be able to write, you know, a post-colonial novel in some ways, and so you know, but the thing about it is, I want to be the type of writer, you know, that can write from various styles and about various topics. And if I don't want to write about Native issues, you know, then I won't, right? If a book comes that has nothing at all to do with Native issues, then, you know, I would be interested. And certainly those 2 books, you know, don't. So
what's interesting here too is that I know, you know, when I have students who have understandable hesitations about the publishing industry, they're sometimes concerned that the books that are about their identity, their ethnic racial identity, their gender or sexual identity, their country of origin, whatever that is, they're worried in many cases, and I think for legitimate reasons, historical reasons, absolutely, that those are the books that might get sidelined, those are the books that might not get published. And I would very much hope, and you know, hope I'm part of working towards this, the idea that, in fact, those are the books we need, those are the books we want. We don't want another book about white people having an affair and crying in their driveway about it. Like, right? Where are you from? Give me the nitty-gritty. Give me all this. Did you, you know, when you went out with Where the Dead Sit Talking, and when you went out again with this book, did you feel then that there was an audience waiting for that, both in terms of the New York publishing industry and in terms of readership? Or did you feel like you had work to do to explain to people why this is the kind of book we need?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I mean, you know, certainly I think before, part of my thinking was, again, you know, to go back to colonization, is that I don't know how many people would really be that interested. You know, that Deep Ellum was the novella that came out in 2014 with a very small press. sort of thinking about, I had some stories I was working on that, had Native characters. And I think actually that book started out with him being a Native character, and I ended up just sort of taking that out, right? And because I thought, what is it? Does his race even, his culture even really matter in this story? And I didn't feel like it did, So in that book, I think at some point I was finishing up. I knew that I finished up in 2016, and the election of 2016 happened. And I remember talking, and Soho Press published Where the Dead Sit Talking. And I remember talking to my editor, Mark Doughton, who's also a fantastic writer as well. Yeah. And just all around great human being. That, Mark and I were talking about, he really encouraged me to continue to push as I revised and worked with him on that book, those issues. I think, feeling a sense that where we were in the country politically, and a lot of that, I think, certainly influenced, especially the removed, right? And thinking about it as, this feeling more now than ever before that these stories need to be told, and why I continue to try to champion Native voices, lesser known Native writers, and the students that I work with, to continue to work on their individual stories that need to be told. Right. And it's so, I think it's problematic to just say, here's a Native writer, because every tribe is different. There are a lot of, I'm Cherokee Nation, as is DeLanna Studi. And that's totally different than, someone who in Oklahoma, I grew up in close to Cheyenne and Arapaho area, and very, very different, even though, they're both Native groups, tribes that, there are a lot of specific differences, I think, in so many complicated ways that, and so to just be, in the country, just, here's Native American literature almost feels, and I think to non-Native people, my friend Santi Frazier and I were just talking about this not long ago, that if you read Hamlet, for example, and it's a ghost story, and right at the beginning of Hamlet, we see Hamlet's father appear as a ghost, right? And usually the reader or the viewer, isn't questioning the identity other than just it's Hamlet's father. Whereas often in a Native, you have a ghost or a spirit in a Native story, and there become a lot of sort of, tricky questions, and what does this spirit mean? What does this ghost mean, right? And and isn't it weird that Native ghosts or spirits get that sort of attachment to them, right? Whereas so many non-Native stories don't. This is one thing
I was going to ask later, but I want to ask it now. Because I'm inspired to. We were talking just slightly backstage about, this is a pretty short book, actually, but you managed to do so much within it. Partly, that's a matter of the number of narrators, the number of, the number of characters, without it feeling like, hey, meet 17 generations of this one family. That is fine. People can do that, but these voices feel essential, load-bearing, kind of. And partly, it's the number of things you do narratively, where you are working with, without maybe giving too much away, I want to be careful here, experiences that might not quite be a real life in some cases, past, present, deep past, folklore, stories within stories, dreams. And I'm probably missing some things there. It's an amazing amount to get into this length of book. And so often, you know, there are plenty of books that are this short, and the reason they're this short is because they focus on one very small thing. And I think the inclination when you're covering this much ground narratively is to have the 500-page, 700-page kind of, you know, God bless, but, you know, the very, very long booster seat of a novel. So I want to, first of all, in a second, I want to ask you about how you managed to get that much into a book this size. But I want to talk about your use of dreams, the afterlife, those voices, the uncanny, and the stories within stories that you use, which we are so often warned away from in traditional writing education. And for me too, I mean, very different cultural background, but I'm Transylvanian. Dreams, stories within stories, folklore are a huge part of our literary tradition. And then I get told at a writing conference when I'm 25, because I put a dream into a story, you cannot do that. No one cares. Dreams don't matter. Dreams don't mean anything. And being young and dumb, I was like, okay.
Right.
Slowly learned my way out of that. But can you talk a little bit about how you get those layers of, say, ancestral voices, ghosts, stories within stories, folklore, dreams, into a narrative without losing the narrative tension that we're likely to look for in a, you know, a book published in America in 2021?
Yeah. We could really talk a long time about this. Right, yeah. I will get the beer.
Transylvanian and Cherokee literature.
You're right, yeah. Yeah, let me get my beer out and we can really talk. No, I mean, and you know, and I think about one of the writers who really inspires me was Murakami. And Murakami once said that, you know, fiction exists as a sort of dream state. John Gardner said that, I think, as well, right? But one of the things about Murakami's work that always, you know, really moved me was that, you know, that sort of otherworldness and surreal otherworldness that I think is in some ways maybe a strong influence on at least Edgar's sections in the mythical darkening land in this book. But that, to me, you know, whether it's dream, whether it's happening on the page, it's a character dreaming or what, if it moves or enlightens us in some ways to the character or to the story or motivation, if that somehow moves the narrative, it feels useful to me. You know, I don't have an MFA, but I do have. My MA was just in English, and I was able to. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, because you taught high. Yeah, you taught high school because you were a teacher for a long time. Also, I taught
elementary school mostly, and then
elementary.
Yeah.
But you know, but as an MA, you know, and I took, and our mutual friend Stuart Onan is still very much a very good friend of mine, and was always a mentor, very important mentor to me when I didn't really know what was going on, right? And back in the 90s, and
tell me.
And well, yeah, no, I still don't know what's going on, right? Yeah, but he you know, he came. I remember him talking about, you know, really, you know, breaking the rules and, you know, fuck it, push the rules, right? You know, and break through those boundaries. And that really stuck with me in terms of taking risks. And so that idea of, you know, dreams, I always thought in everything that I read, I was always, you know, whether it's Murakami or whether, you know, Yoko Tawada is another, she's, you know, Japanese. I love her work. It is so strange and so beautiful. the translation, I can't read it in Japanese, or she writes in German as well. But, that idea of, I guess, it takes me just a minute. Hang on. Sorry. I want to, I really want to do my own thing. I mean, I want to not let any kind of rules, like those traditional workshop rules, like you can't write about the dream. I've never wanted to be that kind of writer. And I always thought, what art does is challenge us and makes us feel ways that that maybe we're not comfortable with sometimes, right? And so I've always looked at it more as, what is it? How does this work? Is this a work of art that's affecting me? It's talking about the human condition, or whatever. I was really grateful. The LA Times review, John Dominy wrote, and the LA Times I was really grateful for that review. And I think he talked a lot about some very important things in terms of what I was trying to capture, in this book. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think there certainly is a momentum to this narrative. There's, you have elements here that are, once in a while I'll read something that's kind of dreamlike, and that's almost euphemistic, because what we mean by dreamlike is nothing happens, which is not the case here, right? You have a ticking clock on the story. They're all getting ready for this celebration of the brother who died. They're reconvening, maybe, if everyone can make it. We have real concern about some of the characters. And there's stuff happening, right? We get this, the appearance of this temporary foster child who upends this world in many ways, in his sort of, his resemblance to the dead brother, but also his interactions with these parents. There's plenty going on that is concrete that we latch onto. And then within that, I think we're able to appreciate there's the anchor of real life story, texture, character, and then we kind of have balloons coming off of it of dreams, stories within stories, all that stuff. And that balance, first of all, is what works for me. And secondly, is why I'm going, oh my God, how did you get this all into such a short book?
Yeah. And, and part of it is I grew up I grew up. I grew out of, as an adult in college, discovering writers like Diane Williams, Lydia Davis, who do this brilliant work in such confined space, and it leaves me asking, what's not being said becomes fascinating, as fascinating as what is written, right? Yeah. And I remember, I think, in the early 90s, there was an issue, and I know it's issue 17. I have a copy of Conjunctions magazine, and I was in Dallas, Texas with some friends in college, and we were at the mall, and we went into a bookstore, and I found I'd never heard of Conjunctions, and it was issue 17, and I opened it up, and there were all these writers I had not heard of, and I remember reading it, and I bought it, and I sat in the back on the drive back to Oklahoma. They were driving, and I was in the back seat reading this, and Diane Williams was in there, and Lydia Davis. I had not heard of either one of them. I think Paul West was in there, Robert Coover, William T. Vollman, David Foster Wallace, Kathy Ack, I can't remember, but all these writers I'd never heard of, and they were so aesthetically different, right? Yeah. And that moment, and I've told Brad Murrow, has become a friend because it was really a dream of mine to publish there, and then I've sort of have become friends with him. That I tell that story with him because that was, you know, such a defining moment for me. I think as a young 20-year-old, you know, 19-year-old at the time, discovering all that within one space. And this is not in any way, I'm not trying to, you know, plug Conjunctions magazine here, but that was
in the comments. That's awesome. Thanks, Penn.
Oh yeah.
Literary magazine that publishes, you know, a little more experimental stuff. They take some risks and
so widely different. You know, Diane Williams next to, you know, William T. Vollman. It was just, oh my gosh. Yeah. And I loved it all, you know, but to return back to the sort of Diane, you know, Diane's work and Lydia Davis's work, and you know, that contained space. I think part of it was that sort of, it's how I've developed as a writer, is to exist more in the small space than it is in the sort of maximalist. You know, my book Desolation of Avenues Untold, which was an experimental novel, and it's over 300 pages. It was my creative dissertation for my PhD. You know, I tried to be a little bit more sort of, I mean, I have fictional newspaper clippings and interviews, and, you know, all sort of, you know, it was a fun book to write, and very different, I think, you know, than most of my stuff. But I think more comfortable in the confined, and being trained from Diane Williams, going through my stories, and, you know, or through my writing, that I send her, you know, I might send her a 15-page story and she line edits so wonderfully, and to tighten it up. So I think over the last, you know, 15 years that I've really gotten to know her and worked with her, when I send her my work, you know, becomes, I send her stuff for Noon, the journal Noon, a lot. And, you know, so it's sort of developed me, I think, to edit my work in that more confined way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you think about, you know, Robert Frost talking about formal poetry and saying free verse poetry is like playing tennis without a net. You know, he needed that constraint. I almost think also of like a baby needing to be swaddled, or they'll scream. There's something about like that, those constraints that it's not, I think it pushes us out of maybe some of our worst tendencies. If we could just write whatever the hell we wanted and we had thousands of pages to fill, we would become self-indulgent. We'd maybe go in really obvious directions. And when we have constraints, it forces you to think differently. In the same way that the form of a sonnet, you only have one more syllable. How are you going to phrase this? Forces us to think differently. I mean, obviously, you're not putting formal constraints on yourself here, other than the idea that different chapters are different points of view, but you're still working not in miniature, just in, you know, you have a relatively short time frame for the present day story. Mm-hmm. What's amazing to me, you know, you're doing that all. You're keeping it very short. It doesn't feel overly edited or overly raw in this way that, I'm not saying you didn't edit your book. Right. This is a compliment. You know, like, it feels like it can breathe. It feels like you have room for tangents and you have room for observations. It's not like you've edited it within an inch of its life and now it's like, you know, Tarzan writes a sonnet kind of line edits. Right.
Well, so much of that, you know, and my agent at the time, you know, helped me, and certainly my editor at Echo, come up with, you know, that structure of, this is really about a week long is your book here, because I had, you know, it was sort of structurally all over the place. At one point it was, really? You know, and it was, I mean, it was longer. We cut a lot of the, Chala sections, which is the spirit. There was a lot of more stories in there, and we cut a lot of that out. I think because they felt so much like a digression. I think to moving the narrative forward. So
it's probably a matter of a little bit going a long way.
Yeah.
That because those to me, they shine, like individual little pearls throughout the book. I think almost The Tiger's Wife by Tea Obrecht, where there are these, these kind of folk tales in her case, spread throughout. And in this way, this novel, the singularity of these stories, I think really helped me to go, oh, here's one. And I know I only have like 2 pages. I got to pay attention. It's going to be over real fast.
Yeah.
So, right. The power of the pen, man.
Yeah, I know. And in some ways, I think, a short book can still be, challenging. I don't want to say that I don't like long books. I mean, Great Believers is a long book and is beautiful. And even, and I'm a Thomas Pynchon fan, right? I love I can't get through a lot of his work, but I love Gravity's Rainbow. I have to use the guide, or I had to use it when to help me. But it's, in a way that's kind of fun, in the way that, maybe Ulysses or, some other challenging, big books are. I think, there used to be, it seems like, this idea of really challenging the reader by writing a big, sort of there's masculinity attached to it, right? I mean, I think Leslie Silko's book, Almanac of the Dead, is a very large book and very challenging that I don't know if it gets credit. She's always, as a Native writer, she's always credited for her book Ceremony, which is taught, it's taught all the time. But Almanac of the Dead is weird and big and challenge, and this great novel that I would encourage people to go check out. It's weird and
Ceremony.
Yes,
cool.
Well, most people have it. I think Almanac of the Dead is underappreciated. I just absolutely love it, and that's the kind of, I think. I mean, again, to go back to the kind of writing or the type of writer I guess I want to be is one that isn't lumped into just, one specific category, like only,
for sure,
or labeled as one type, I guess. So I will continue to do different things, and we'll see.
Yeah. I'm with you. I feel like I have friends too, especially the Chicago literary community is really tight and really inclusive at the same time. So I found myself friends with romance novelists, mystery novelists, where I wouldn't necessarily be running into them at, say, conferences. And I have so much respect for people who can pull 1 or 2 books a year out. Yeah. And they are consistent. They're the same thing, but different enough that they keep people hooked. Like, it is a skill set I don't have, and it's a attention span I don't have, where I want to do something radically different every time. And that's not like a great thing about me necessarily. That's like, I've got ADD. I can't focus for that long. Like, I just can't, But we need both, right? The world needs that consistency. We need someone to write 17 cozy mysteries set in the same place. And then we need people who are doing experiments every time,
Yeah. I mean, people have asked me several people have asked me, how were you able to because I have two kids, you know, I have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old, and, you know, with teaching and everything else going on, how are you able to write? How in the past 7 years you were able to write, you know, 4 books or whatever, 8 years. And that's, you know, generally it's, you know, the books aren't very long, first of all, you know, but secondly is there's this sort of, you know how it is. I mean, when you have kids, it's, you know, I'm not going out, you know, and doing stuff like when I was single, you know, and didn't have kids, that I was, you know, going out and you know, I don't have any hobbies anymore really, except, you know, playing with, you know, being with my kids. And so it's easier to go to the desk and to sit down and to work, you know, so,
I will say, and there, you know, I don't want to overgeneralize, and there are lots of, you know, people who don't have kids who are wildly productive, but I will say, when I go to a residency, like, you know, an artist colony, and there are 15 people there, whatever, there's some people who are like, oh, I'm going to take a day and go for walks and think about what I want to do. The artists are like priming my canvases. The people with kids get there and they're like,
yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's also, and I think, I'm excited to see Jared back. That means we have some audience questions, but maybe one of the last things I'll ask you as Jared's getting ready with the questions, you know, I think I'm in a similar, but I have, you know, 13 and 10-year-old, and, you know, teaching. I feel like I don't know what I would do without those things, you know, alone in my own head all day. I might have problems. You teach, you know, you're not someone, I think, who fell into teaching simply as a way to support your writing. You're a genuine teacher. You've always struck me that way, the way you talk about teaching. You know, do you feel, I mean, I know that I feel like my teaching is something that sustains me emotionally and sustains my own writing practice in a really fundamental way. There are the rewards of teaching where, oh my God, the student's doing great and they published their novel, or I love my, you know, my class. But do you feel like you're continuing, you know, what does teaching, and maybe that includes having your own kids at home, but how does that shape what you're doing and how you think about your own craft at this point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, because I mean, I don't even like to think of my work when I'm working with a student, because I want to really, you know, there's something really bad to say, this is the way I would do it, you know, but then again, you know, maybe that's the most helpful. Part of, I guess, but you know, when I look at student work, and especially graduate student work, is, you know, we're talking so much about just structure. It's like they already understand that understand that the traditional, you know, conflict, and that this is a problem. You know, we're trying to get through this problem or these problems. They understand that. You know, climax and all that, you know, the very prurient sounding,
the story always comes out at that moment, like,
right. You know, but so it ends up being discussions more on really following, you know, helping them understand a timeline and streamline the narrative, you know, and those kinds of things. So I don't, I mean, occasionally I will say, yeah, these are areas where I have struggled with too in my, you know, in my work. I don't know if you feel like that when you're working with students as well.
I do. I think for me too, just seeing, you know, the constant reminder that the things that I struggle with are things that everyone struggles with.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, like, oh yeah, I do that too.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't because I have a, you know, flawed book in some fundamental way. It's not because I'm lazy. It's not because you know, I'm a bad writer today or always. It's just like, You know, you see people go through the same things and you go, yep, that's what happens when you get halfway through a novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very important, especially, you know, when you're talking about something long, like they're writing a novella or a novel, and you get to that 100-page mark, that feels like, you know, where it feels like you're just sort of, okay, you know.
Yeah.
That's the, was it Christine Scott or someone said, maybe it was, I'm thinking it's Christine Scott, but start strong, finish strong, and in the middle go as deep as you can.
Oh, right? I like that. I hope that sounds like something Christine Scott.
It was either her or Joanna. It could have been Joanna Scott, maybe. But
cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, we should see the questions we have via Jared from the audience.
Thank you both. So we do have a few questions from the audience. The first one is, where the Dead Sit Talking is so intricately organized on the level of the chapter as well as breaks within chapters, how is the organization of the removed similar or different?
I think it's, really different. I tried to do something very different with structuring the removed, which is that, I mean, there's only one, narrator in Where the Dead Sit Talking. It's Sequoia going through this time while he was in foster care, and pretty linear timeline, right? Whereas, the removed, we have basically 4 different narrators, and it became a lot more, and that was part of the fun of it, was finding that challenge of, okay, I have Sonia's timeline, I have Maria's, I have Edgar's, and then I have Chala as the sort of spirit ancestral voice telling, and how do I thread all these together, right? In ways that make it, a propulsive structure as a novel. So I think that, I think it's very different structure-wise.
It is. You're sustaining, it's these constant, like you'll kind of throw one thread up in the air, and then we're following another. It's almost like Scheherazading the story in a way, right? You're just
and I mean, that's part of it. Is I'm really interested in language too. So there are, like, the part that DeLanna, a little Latin phrase, and I have some Cherokee phrases and Cherokee symbols, that. I wanted to draw attention more to language than, this book, I think the book of the month, labeled it contemporary fiction, which I was like, really? I think it's more literary fiction than contemporary. So I feel like that.
We're alive right now, so it's contemporary.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I think that might be misleading in some ways, that it's not plot so much that it all revolves around this one event that we're leaning toward, right? But there are, I was so much more interested in looking at how language,
I could see someone looking at the book, and I'm not giving much away because we know this very early on, and going, oh, there's a police shooting. This is a contemporary social and political issue, so this is contemporary, but it's I was not surprised, but maybe a little bit that that happened, and then that was not really ultimately what the book is about. It's really about the that's the splash of the rock maybe in the pond. This book is about the ripples spreading out from that,
right? And addressing those questions of how do you heal from this trauma and intergenerational trauma and those kinds of things.
Yeah. What else have we got?
Another question, and you mentioned a few Japanese writers who influenced you and whom you admire, and so an audience member had a question asking about how you feel, I guess, in terms of Latin American magical realism. For them, they've thought about the stubborn ghosts and Ron Rulfo's work or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and they just generally want to know your thoughts on that, and if that's had any influence on your writing.
Yeah, well, Garcia Marquez is a huge influence on me. Rulfo certainly, but Marquez, I think, his collected stories. The problem, though, and I think a lot of people, it's problematic to assign the label magic at all toward anything native. Only, and I say this because you're talking more about culture and it falls back into colonization, right? And the non-nativeness, the non-native reader looking to go back what I was saying earlier, like what I'm interested in the native book is to find something, ghostly or, those sort of questions that come out of colonization that I think can be problematic. So it's really, just like Almanac the Dead, and Ceremony, is a book that there are some things that you can't talk about, right? But applying magic to it is a little bit, it's a little bit disrespectful, I think, to the culture to say, and I'm not, coming down on people for using that, because I think it comes out of just, not knowing, or
that's what we're taught to call that tradition, that Latin American tradition in school, is magical realism.
Yeah. Sure.
Right? Yeah.
But it falls into that, at least for native, and I can't speak so much for the Latin America, but Marquez is, he's a huge influence, just because he's a beautiful writer. Love in the Time of Cholera is a beautiful novel too, if you haven't read that. But I really love his short stories.
Right now, so it would be a weird book to read in 2021, but good, but important. Right?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So another question we have, audience member is curious about where your characters come from. Are they inspired by people in your life or from your imagination? And I will just add that, when I read The Removed, and coming across Jim Thorpe, I think I read the book around November, and then in December, the New York Times had an article about Jim Thorpe because there's a debate about his gold medals. And It was great for me to see that. I remember seeing that. I was like, oh, wow. It's like, just because I had done my background research after reading about Jim Thorpe in the novel. So I don't know if you wanted to speak on that in terms of characters in the novel.
Well, Jim Thorpe, they returned his medals to his family. He got them taken away because he was getting paid for playing professional athletics. He was, making money. And at the time, I think the Olympic rule, right, was that you can't play in the Olympics if you're a professional, getting paid or something. But as far as the question, sorry, what?
Are your characters inspired by people in your life from your?
Oh yeah. Sorry. Not many. I mean, some of them are. Some of them are inspired by real people, but not many. I think part of the fun of writing fiction is, coming up with characters on your own that are able to sort of go on and do their own thing. Here's a good exercise that I do. I talked about this in another talk, so some people may have heard it, but when I teach undergrads and, I have them list 3 things that someone they know really well, and maybe it's that, oh, this person is argumentative. This person is, very jealous, and this person loves sports, right? About someone they know. But then do the opposite. Write down the opposite of those things and attach that to a character, because they'll react in opposite ways, and then play with that and bring in another character, do the same thing, and just to sort of play with and understand. Pretty soon you've got a character that you understand, how they're going to react to certain situations. I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. That's a fun exercise to do with beginning writers, especially. But I don't necessarily, try to. It's kind of like the question of the reader. Who's the reader? And it's always, there's always part of myself in a lot of people I write about. And that's who I feel like I'm writing for is if I'm writing for anybody, it's for myself, right? I mean, I think it was Toni Morrison said, write the book you want to read most that hasn't been written yet or something, right? And, you know, so I always try to think about that.
I think too, I always reminding people that when you dream, unless you're dreaming about, even if you are dreaming about someone you know, as you dream, you're the one putting words in their mouth. You're the one choosing what they do. But a lot of times when we dream, I mean, I don't know about other people, but for me, like I dream a lot of people that I don't know. They're not real people. They're just it's imagination. And that's, I think for a lot of us, the way that fictional characters work. And a psychologist would say, well, they're all you. But they're, you know, magnifications of very small parts of you. They're exaggerations of things. They're projections, right?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
So we have one more question. Is the annual honoring Ray Ray provides is an orienting point in the time in the book. Can you speak to the role of rituals in marking time today, particularly when it comes to loss? And do you have any personal rituals as a writer that you are willing to share?
What was the first part of that question? Can I speak to, did you say rituals?
Can you speak to the roles of rituals in marking time today, particularly when it comes to loss? And then do you have any personal rituals as a writer that you are willing to share?
I mean, ritual is a weird word. I don't think so. I think part of it is just sitting down. Part of it is just getting myself in the chair and, you know, and turning off the phone and, you know, not scrolling through Twitter or Instagram or something, looking at pictures, you know, but turning that off and, you know, shutting it off and pulling up the manuscript. Once I've done that, once I've gotten in the chair and pulled up the manuscript, I can work. So it's just getting here. It's kind of like going to the gym to me. It's like, I don't want to, you know, I need to lose 15 pounds. My doctor tells me that, right? I realize that. I really don't want to go to once I drive, I change clothes and I get to the gym, I'm fine. I can, you know, I'll run and work out and stuff, but it's just getting there. And I think that's the same thing with, but in terms of about loss, again, what I've always said is, you know, exploring questions is a good starting place for me. Thinking about questions and what Chekhov says, you know, fiction should explore questions. And yes. You know, this pandemic I've been actually, I mean, there's only, you know, I'm not sitting around blowing smoke rings and listening to Dark Side of the Moon, you know, all this, you know.
I don't know.
Like Rebecca, no. You know, so if I were single, yeah, it may be a lot more of that going on, right? But I mean, it's forced me to actually, I've been pretty productive over this last year because it's, you know, it's getting in the chair and pulling up the manuscript or whatever I'm working on and doing it. That's all. That's the only ritual. I don't know, Rebecca. What about? Is that?
Yeah, no, it is, and I think it's interesting because people, I think, want to talk. I understand the question about inspiration that is often related to this question, and I understand the question about routine, ritual. I think there are writers who probably really feel like they're entering some kind of different zone and they have things that they do. But yeah, it is, inspiration comes in, I think, at the beginning of something. Other than that, it is getting yourself to the gym, like you said. Just, I don't need to be inspired to go on the elliptical. I just need to do it. And the same, you know, yeah, sometimes I'll like light a candle and have a glass of wine, but it's not, I can also write without that. You know, in other times I can also just write at Starbucks. It's, I think it's more, I think that sort of, I think what people are getting at with that question, that's a really important thing, is how you get in this sort of liminal zone that's part consciousness, part subconscious, right? Mm-hmm. Part awake, part dreaming, that you do ultimately need to be in, or at least I do, to surprise myself, not to write something that is just dictated by my most conscious mind, which would be boring. I think probably for some people that involves meditation, it involves that kind of thing. For me personally, it's about the story. It's about, like you said, that Chekhov idea of, can the story itself ask me questions that get me into a zone where I'm uncertain? Can the story itself get me elsewhere?
Right.
You know,
thinking about the story and the characters specifically. But Rebecca, let me ask you, do you feel like you work better in an environment like at the coffee shop where there's some music playing and there's people around? Because here's what's weird. I used to could not write at all but since the pandemic and, with the limited, I will go to, this little coffee shop with my mask on, and there's something nice about the music playing. There's something stimulating about it. We all need solitude to write, but I've never ever been able until this pandemic to be able to sort of still get into that zone, even in a public place. It's really weird.
Kafka said that, I'm saying that like Kafka said it to me personally the other day. Kafka apparently wrote to someone that the cafe was the natural habitat of the author because it was a way to be both completely alone and completely subsumed by society. Like, that's sort of the lot of the writer in life, is that you are isolated, but you're also part of the mass. But he said it much better than that in Czech. But it's something that I miss right now. And it's like Chicago, there's no like outdoor seating right now for the coffee shops. So it's, but it's, we're getting it done, man. We're still getting it done. You just published a book in the middle of all this. That's huge. And it's a really good book.
Well, thank you. Thanks. I mean, I had it done for, I started it as soon as I finished the last one in 2016, which came out in 2018. And I actually started this one before the last one came out. So, I mean, it's been, I spent a few years on it, but.
That must have been helpful in the sense that I know that, I know this wasn't literally your second book, but in a sense, in terms of your public presence, this is a second act in some ways, right? And I think sometimes when you've had a book that's a little more public, that's been more noted, which certainly the last one was, you feel sitting down for the next book that people are suddenly watching you, which can be a trip. So it's probably a good thing that you'd started this, that you had some momentum already before. It was,
my early work, I don't know that was really getting any kind of attention until this, and then meeting you at the National Book Awards, and then, 2 days later, we're also having dinner outside in Miami.
Oh, I know.
It's like I kept seeing you and hanging out with you and everybody, and being in this like huge presence of that surrounded this book and your book, and it was very strange because before I'm really used to people not really paying that much attention, outside of our small literary community, which may exists on Twitter or whatever with people, but so there was a little bit of that, paralysis when I thought, people are actually going to read this next book, and so it becomes a little bit more challenging to go back to, screw it. I'm writing this for myself, really, right? And so, That's what I try to tell students as well.
Yeah. Maybe quarantine's helpful in that way. Like you're just so alone.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier to just be like, yup, it's just me and the walls, man.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Jared, are we wrapping up or are we trying to, is that, that's what we're doing? Okay.
We're gonna wrap it up. This has been wonderful. I want to thank both of you, Brandon Hobson and Rebecca Makkai, for joining us tonight and to speak about this great novel. I also want to thank this evening's ASL interpreters, Selena Flowers and Roy Burton of ProBono ASL. Pen Out Loud is PEN America's signature event series focused on amplifying diverse voices and convening vital conversations. It's also, our honor to partner with the Strand bookstore and Scripps Presents this winter. And we also want to thank our regional partners, the Asian American Writers Workshop, Austin Public Library Foundation, Magic City Poetry Festival, Miami Book Fair, and the Magic City Books. This program is also made part and possible from a grant from the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. And please join us on Thursday, March 4th. And we will be partnering with the Asian American Writers Workshop to co-present and welcome Nobel laureate Kazuo Ishiguro to celebrate his new novel, Clara and the Sun. And he'll be joining conversation with the New Yorker staff writer, Gia Tolentino. Tickets are in sale now. So continue to stay safe, everyone. And please enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you again, Brandon and Rebecca.
Thank you to everyone. Jared, thank you so much. And Rebecca, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.